So excited to be here. Welcome to the Sacramento Women in Leadership's first event ever. We're really excited and looking forward to hearing from Chelsea. Before we get started, I wanted to make a few announcements. For this meeting, keep your microphone muted. We all know we're dealing with crazy times and dogs, family members, anybody can come in, so keeping the microphone muted is very helpful. If you do have questions at any time, post them in the chat. We are collecting that information and there'll be time for some questions at the end, and we'll proctor those to Chelsea. So go ahead at any time, you can post in that chat. Keep a lookout for an announcement. The board is planning some summer events, hopefully, and that should be coming out in a little bit, and we'd love to have you guys come to those. So keep tuned. And lastly, we still have a few board positions open. I'm going to post my email address in the chat right after this. And so if you're a Sacramento-based GSMer and you're interested in being on the board, feel free to send me an email. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my co-president, Corey, who's going to introduce Chelsea for us.
Yes. Good evening, everybody. So as Kelly said, my name is Corey Ritter. I am the co-president of the Women's in Leadership Club for Sacramento's campus. On behalf of myself and the executive board, we want to welcome you to our inaugural speaker series event. Kelly and I co-founded the first ever Women's Leadership Club for Sacramento back in January. And so we're so excited to have all of you with us tonight to kick off for our first event. It's my honor to introduce tonight's speaker, Chelsea Miner. Chelsea is the corporate director of public affairs for Raley's, which is a regional family-owned grocery store chain operating in Northern California and Nevada. She serves as a spokeswoman for the organization while developing and executing the company's public affairs and brand reputation strategies. Chelsea started with Raley's in 2015, managing the company's external communication. Prior to Raley's, Chelsea worked for KP Public Affairs, supporting California companies' public relations services. Chelsea graduated with a degree in social science from California State University, Stanislaus, and completed her executive MBA from California State University, Sacramento. Please join me in welcoming Chelsea Miner.
Oh, what an exciting inaugural event. I wasn't nervous until I got on and I realized I was your first speaker. So the pressure is on, but I'm up for the challenge and super excited to be here with all of you. And thank you to those that are doing video. It's so much nicer to see all of your smiling faces and waves and everything in between. So thank you. Thank you, Corey. I met Corey several months ago at a UC Davis presentation, and she was kind enough to invite me. So I'm excited to do this evening, share some insights, and hopefully have a little bit of a dialogue. And but more importantly, I hope to meet all of you at some point when all of this gets lifted. Corey and I were talking about enjoying a glass of wine sometime soon. So all in good time. I've got a PowerPoint. I think it will help guide my conversation tonight, but I'll try to go back and forth so that you can also see my face. So give me a sec. I'm going to share my screen. All right. All right, there we go. So when Corey and I started chatting, I kind of went through, and of course, amidst COVID, I've done plenty of work presentations over the last several months, and was trying to identify, why women have been so successful amongst COVID. And there's some really amazing articles out there. But this actually came out right around April 1st. And this is a Harvard Business Review piece. Written actually by a man, co-written by a man and a woman, around what men can learn from women and why those leadership skills are welcomed in the workplace, and thought it was timely and relevant, especially amongst a time that there's so much fear based out there. We've experienced that from the grocery industry, from both the employee side in terms of, coming and showing up every day to work, but also of course on the customer side. And I think that some of those things I've seen personally as we've gone through the crisis. So we will get started. Corey gave a great introduction, so I'll fly through this, but I always like to give you a little bit of who I am so that maybe you have some connection to me that we didn't have before this. I grew up in California born and raised, and I grew up in Santa Clara County. And as Corey mentioned, I went to CSU Stanislaus. One thing she didn't mention is I joined a sorority. So I'm an Alpha Zeta Delta and continue to engage in some of our alumni associations. But I was also student body president. So I had taken a shift in my time I wanted to be a teacher, and then I got involved in politics and realized that that was a place that I wanted to navigate and support. More than anything, my goal was, of course, at the time, was how do I communicate for those that can't be communicated with? And a lot of it was, all the things that you learned within your government work that you wanted to translate to students. And had a pie in the sky dream that I would go and I work for the assembly and I would do it for the legislature. And quickly after that, I realized that that was a tough run. So I was an assembly fellow out of the Sac State Center for California Studies, which is about a year-long fellowship program. And then following that, I did get a job in the Capitol. So I worked there for about 4 years. And then as Corey mentioned, I really made a huge shift personally that I realized at the time, because I was trying to communicate for the general Joe, that I wanted to communicate for business and I wanted to help business succeed in California. And so I made the shift doing public relations and public affairs for KP, a plug for KP. They're an incredible organization. Highly, highly, highly recommend them if you're interested in that field. They also do lobbying. And at my time at KP, I went back and did my executive MBA, and my final project was with Raley's. So very serendipitous. I finished out the program literally on a Saturday, and I started my new job at Raley's on a Monday. So a pretty incredible journey. I've had, again, several roles within the Raley's organization, and we'll talk through kind of a few of them as we go through. So this is a quote from the piece, right? If men had the top roles, then they must be doing something right. So why not get women to act like them? And I think all of us can say that, that conversation has happened time and time again, right? Is that you need to be overconfident, or that you need to speak with confidence? Is that you need to advocate for yourself or the role that you want, and you need to get more pay? And then a man, would be the one that would advocate for those things. That you should handle conflict head on, that you should be a little bit more aggressive in your approach. Or that you should take on a role that maybe you didn't want to take previously, but you did because that was what you were told to do so. And so the article points out this really great piece that is, there's not a lack of competent females. Really, the challenge that exists is that there's too few of obstacles for men that are incompetent to get up to those leadership roles. And as I mentioned, this article is all around, this idea that we need to flip this conception and realize that women have a lot of incredible traits that we need to both kind of reimagine and rethink about, and think about how we can translate that, in this kind of male world. I've built my career in male-dominated industries. So you think about politics, you think about grocery specifically. It's a very old white male environment. A lot of historical relationships in both of those settings. I've been very, very grateful to the mentors, that many of which that are men. But I think that the place that I've kind of come from is this: know your value and know what you can bring to the table. And the old, very, very traditional, of course, is, fake it till you make it. And sometimes you have to do that. And I remember being a young 20-something-year-old and in the legislature, and realizing that sometimes you may not be the most expertise, person in the room, but you definitely have something to say. So I'm going to go through about a few of these. There are 7 in total as a part of the article. Highly recommend you go back and take a look at them. But again, I'm going to just kind of cover a few, just given our time today. I want to give enough time for questions. So one of the concepts: don't lean in when you've got nothing to lean in about. So I have this great piece. This was an article that I found online around, of course, these, from a male leadership perspective, there's this conversation of, well, you should be more assertive. You should insert yourself in those conversations so that you could be heard or that you could be seen. And I think if you're not that, then you're the nice guy, right? And so for me, this has been something around, how do you have a seat at the table? And I definitely learned this after my executive MBA program. So in my role at Raley's, again, I serve as the company spokesperson and head up all of our external communication. So in the event of a crisis, call it COVID, we created, we pulled together what we call the crisis communications team. And so that has somebody from our finance department, that has somebody from legal, that has myself from external comms. You have somebody that comes in from internal comms, in addition to the executive team. And I remember having a conversation, and this was actually advice from one of my male mentors. And I had brought up, we had been talking about an issue. It had been kind of a customer facing issue. but it had to do with a team member who had had an improper discussion or situation with a customer. And so how were we going to handle it? How were we going to handle the team member and of course handle the customer? And I stepped back and I didn't say a word, and I covered what I needed to cover, which was how could we take care of the customer? And that was my expertise, and this is what I was going to do. And I had a conversation with my mentor and good friend, and I brought up a few additional points. And he said, why didn't you bring those up in the meeting? And I said, it's one of those things where I don't want to speak up if it's not my expertise, right? So this concept around, okay, yeah, am I doing it just to be heard? Am I doing it just to be relevant in this meeting? And he gave great advice, which is if you have a seat at that table, of course, first and foremost, know your role, but contribute. You're there because you earned that seat. You're there because you deserve to be there. And that ability for you to integrate, whether you're not the HR leader or you're not the legal leader, but you can start to see the way that those competencies work together for the greater good, you have to speak up, right? In those situations, you're the only person in the room that maybe have that thought. And so I think it's this very important balance of, yes, being in the room is part of the thing, but speaking up and saying what you feel is the right thing to say and contributing to the conversation is just as valuable. This one I think women do very, very well, which is know your limitations, right? This is about self-awareness. This is about something that, I think we have to work on over time. I really love this quote, right? The ability to take an honest look at your life without attachment to it being right or wrong, and having perspective, right? So, and that's personal. And I think that for women, we do this really, really well. But as I was reflecting and thinking about today, I think it means and is important that we think about it over time, that your role in terms of self-awareness and that gut check that you give yourself has to be over time, and it has to be completely fluid in terms of the process. And I think about that from my perspective as of today. So my previous role, I came into the organization and I was Director of Public Relations and Public Affairs. And I managed a team that handled everything from community relationships to events to the political work that I do today. And I had an amazing and dynamic, robust team. Today, I'm a single contributor. So in January, I took a new role. I report directly to our CEO and handle, again, this still spokesperson, still external relations, but really politically focused, and then supporting our executive team. So any external message that comes out of the company, whether that's our CEO speaking on a panel or our owner speaking, I help coach, mentor, and support them and help them identify what that right strategy is. But I have this now challenge of, I used to be involved in all these things. I used to know how everything worked or had an opinion on how everything worked. And now I have to step back and I have to check myself too. Is that my role to say something anymore? And I think that self-awareness is really, really important. I had this actually, my example for this one was a male team member that used to actually report to me. And I think, as I talked about earlier, this kind of concept of evolution of your self-awareness. So he had worked for me in sports marketing. So you imagine those are the relationships with the Kings and River Cats. And then he also handled some of our events. And at the time, we were opening up a new store and he was managing all the kind of touch points for the grand opening celebration. And I will be honest, had very little self-awareness. And he had gone through, we had asked a local band to participate and support this big event. And they were going to come in and they were going to kind of kick off the whole welcome of the morning. And it's the night before and we're shuffling calendars and we're figuring things out and we're supposed to be at the store at 4 a.m. in the morning the next day. And he says to me, hey, I just want to let you know the band canceled and they're not able to join us anymore. So I said, okay, we moved on the day, we rearranged the schedule, everything was taken care of. And come to find out, he had messed up the calendar, told the band the wrong time, realized it, and then thought, instead of reorganizing the day, just said, I'm just going to cancel it so then we don't have to worry about it. Well, the band contacted Raley's. And the band was, of course, upset. They had prepped. They had all taken the day off work. This was like a volunteer band. There had been significant investment for this group to come in. And of course, they also wanted to be a part of it. And it was that level of self-awareness that I realized that he wasn't a right fit for the organization, right? So as you think about self-awareness, it's not just about kind of how you show up in your day-to-day. It may be a self-awareness around your organization and that the values do not align. And for him, it was nothing to him. He had felt like nothing was wrong. Well, when you work for a privately held family-owned business, those relationships matter and that reputation matters. And so long and short is he eventually was let go because of several other incidents that were very similar to that. But it's, I think that thought process around, how am I showing up in my organization? What are those values and how do they align? And am I being self-aware enough to say it's a fit or it's not a fit in this situation? So a different concept that's brought up here is motivation through transformation. And this is really around, thinking about how do we, I think this is a very new concept in the business world, around how do we transform people's attitudes and beliefs to drive that engagement, to drive that performance, to drive what that outcome is. And I think a lot of times women can win people's hearts and souls by both, traditional EQ, but also IQ. And we're seeing that, I think, a lot more in the business community. So you think about companies like Tom's Shoes, right? That has this greater purpose. They're not just selling you shoes, they're selling you shoes and contributing them back to individuals in other countries. You have technologies like Tesla. While their reputation and brand may struggle, they've got some real excitement around this transformation and what they think the future of cars will look like, and how does that drive the innovation and the things that they do, and again, that overall output from their team members who want to be a part of something. So I've seen this at Raley's. It's been absolutely incredible to be a part of this. So the story here is Mike Teal is our owner. He has owned the company since 2015. It was right around the same time that I joined the company. And he had come back in 2010 as the CEO. He had gone off and done some other professional business things and had come back and said, if I'm going to come back and I'm going to be a part of this family business, I've got to be a part of a bigger purpose. And Mike realized that the closest thing that had really transformed his thinking was that food is medicine. This concept that what you put in your body fuels you, and the work that we do as a grocery store defines what you purchase. If we put Oreos on an end cap and we're encouraging you to do an impulsive buy, that probably isn't in the name of your health and your wellness. So we developed a vision and kind of purpose statement, which was to infuse life with health and happiness by changing the way the world eats one plate at a time. And this created this momentum and this purpose around this shared vision that we wanted to make people healthier. I often tell people that the world is a very big pie in the sky dream when you're 126 stores. But the vision is, if we make changes as a grocery store and you can prove that you can financially do those things, that you can eventually, you will encourage your competitors to do it. So when other companies like Safeway or Trader Joe's starts to implement these things, that you've really started to create this change and that you are going to see that ripple effect as it relates to people's health and how we approach grocery. And that's everything from the way that we put tags on cereals to show you which are higher in added sugar, to removing soda from the French X stands. But the piece I think that has been so important is, how do you bring your team members on board? How do you bring a 20-year employee who had worked for Raley's, who knows I'm getting way more margin for those Oreos than I would ever get for that healthy granola bar? And how do you start to change? And so this transformation has been really incredible. But that level of engagement, I think, is key. And how do we think about inspiring your team members, engaging them through that process? What's that communication? All of those types of things, I think, are incredibly important, and bringing them through the fold and not doing it too rapidly. And I think that that has been something that we've seen, great success. All right, this is by far my favorite, and I think one that many of you can relate to, which is don't command, empathize. And this is one by far that I think is women's superpower, right? That we have great empathy. And I know often you're told, well, that makes you look weak, right? The fact that you cared or that you took some sensitivity to that, that makes you weak. And I actually think that that makes you balanced, right? Because at the end of the day, yes, we are here to make a profit. That is my job, is to hit the bottom line and act responsible. But at the same regard, in order for us to be here for 10, 20, 50, another 80 years, we have to have that personal connection. And I think what we're realizing at Raley's is that's so much more important now, especially all of us at our home, and you're utilizing things like e-commerce a whole lot more, that you've got to have that connection and you've got to be able to build loyalty. And I think that the ability to connect and relate to people and to have empathy, right? When I get a customer complaint, which happens often, right? And they've had a bad experience, right? Just having empathy to say, I'm so sorry that happened. You're right. That is 100% wrong. And for that, I'm sorry. And we take responsibility, and here's what we're going to do about it. And so I think as you think about your roles within your organizations, this is one of those that I wanted to highlight for the sheer fact of don't not do it, right? It's going to come natural, but don't not do it because of you're fearful of what that may look like. This to me is about showing qualities of understanding. And again, it doesn't have to be sentimental or mushy or anything of that nature. But really realizing what people are going through, whether that be home and work. And I think that's become even more predominant as we think about COVID, right? As I started the talk, the fear of coming into the office, whether that be that you have a loved one at home that is over the age of 65 and, challenged during this time, whether that's that you have a brand new baby at home, right? All of those types of things. How do we have empathy and understand what people are going through to drive their productivity and they're delivering, what they give to your organization in a very, very different way. All right. Don't say you're humbled, be humble. Again, this is one of those I think that women do extremely well. And again, I'm often reminded of, as I've flipped back and forth here, thinking about the male counterpart to this, which is, be bold and make yourself heard and fight for what you want and things like that. But, we are trained as women to be modest, to avoid things like being too assertive or, being the loudest person in the room, as we talked about earlier. And I think most times people would say that's not valued in the workforce. And I think it really is. And so as we think about, things like doing something without a level of arrogance, it is being humble, right? It is taking that ownership, is being as involved as possible. But it's also, again, kind of speaking up and recognizing that when you have something that you've contributed to the organization or that you want to contribute, not to feel guilty, not to allow that to make you feel less accepted or make you feel less heard in these types of environments. And I think there's a really good balance that women have that I think would be incredibly important from a male's perspective. So this actually, my example for this one just happened around the COVID time. And it was a leader within our organization who has very little experience in media relations and these types of things. And we had a situation where we were told by a team member that they had tested positive for COVID and taken certain measures to sanitize the store, clean things, do things, all of the above. It had been pretty extensive. And in that decision, we had decided that we really wanted to be transparent. This had been very early on. And so it was this debate around, okay, not that we would hide it, but should we put it out on a website? Should we share this to the nth degree? Should we put it in an email? Should we put it on the signs? And it's your old Chipotle example, which I always like to talk about, right? Where they used to, when they were going through the challenges around food safety, they would put up signs that said, our stores are closed because we're having maintenance issues, versus, no, we've got a food safety issue that we're trying to address that we haven't got a handle on. So we go out with this statement and we tell the team, we tell our customers, we put things on social media, I tell the media that yes, we've had a confirmed case and that we're sanitizing the store. And come to find out that the individual did not have COVID. So they could not give us confirmation that they actually had it. But we had gone down this entire path, right, to share and be transparent and so forth. And so I send a follow-up email to all my media outlets and I said, correction, this individual does not have COVID. And I get a call from the reporter, and I don't have a very strong relationship with her, but of course there's a mutual respect. And she says to me, can you tell me more about this? So she starts asking questions and so forth. And I said, let me see what I can get. I'll call you back. And so we go into a crisis huddle and say, okay, how do we want to handle this? And this male individual says to me, I don't care. I don't owe the media anything. We don't have to say anything. I just don't think you call the woman back, right? Let the story be the story, and let's just call the woman, not call the woman back. And it was pretty aggressive. Nobody stood up and said, yes, you should. And so, I'm in the moment, and I'm going to be real honest. I got very heated and emotional personally, and kind of had said to him, okay, I hear you, right? And this is that kind of moment of, do I stand my ground because this is my expertise, or do I kind of push? So we go back and forth. We have this whole thing, and I say to him, I hear you. I totally respect that. I need a moment. So I leave the room, I take my moment, I come back, and in that moment, I realized I needed to stand up and say what I believed. And I needed to do what I felt was right, which was to call this woman back. Now, did I give her anything? No. But I think it's that process around, being humble and saying, okay, yes, I need to respect that you're in this role of hierarchy, but also being respectful in that environment to say, okay, but I know that we can do this and we can do this right. And I'm not going to let you down, and that's how this is going to operate. So that being said, I think it's this moment around there wasn't anything for me around, I wanted to be right. And I had this pride that I needed to do that. It was about really making sure that the organization had that great reflection moving forward. And then I knew that there was a way to handle it that, again, without understanding or history from this perspective, I think that was really important. So overall, I think that's, again, something as we think about in terms of, how we operate. All right, I'm going to close out here, which is, this was something as I thought about the 7 things, again, I didn't go through all of them, that I think kind of highlights this concept around, things that we talked about, that emotional intelligence, that vision, and how do we inspire and lead? Of course, how do we build that trust through empathy? And then how do you, again, think about your role within the organization and what you can contribute. But I think more than anything, again, as I think about speaking to you and as you're all in different parts of your career, it's how do we continue to support each other as women to be comfortable with who we are, and that some of these things that we've talked about sometimes feel fluffy, right? Sometimes feel a little soft, but we start to really reflect and say that contribution to the organization is really, really special and incredible. And that, hopefully 5-10 years from now, this becomes kind of this norm. But as we think about leaders in our organizations and how we can start to transform change, realizing that these traits are important and imperative, I would argue, to future development and future workplace, and the balance, and thinking about things like now that we're craving human interaction and attention, and how do we start to foster that and support people in these remote environments, or in an environment that they don't have childcare anymore, or they've lost a loved one because of this tragic disease. All those types of things I think kind of come to mind. And, how do we help and support our male counterparts in some of these things, and show them that it doesn't make you soft or it doesn't make you weak, but it makes you human. And that some of these traits, again, as we think about the future workforce, and as you think about your ranks and your organizations, these are the things that I think are going to transform us and lead us into better organizations. So with that, I am going to go off this so that we can go through those questions. And then I'll put this back up at the end, but please. Stop share.
Okay, we have a question here. How do you balance those classically female things, like being humble and listening, with being bold enough to get a seat at the table?
Ooh, what a great question. The first thing that comes to mind is mentorship. I think as I think about my career, and especially this last kind of pivot and move that I've made, I think it's important that you have individuals in your chest, right? That you can gut check, right? Because to your point, it could come across too much or too aggressive in different scenarios. But the other thing I think about it is it's that level of confidence, right? That I would argue from what we could gain as women, right, is thinking about that confidence, right? And not having the fear, right, that being humble is going to not translate into what you want, or by being, empathetic to your team members and what they're going through won't get you there. And I think having that confidence and just kind of owning it is really imperative.
I have a question. Do you have advice for, like, when you were talking about that situation with a male coworker and the reporter, how you said, I need to take a moment and you stepped outside? Do you have any advice for, like, I'm a very emotional person in general, and sometimes that can be, people in the workplace can see that's very womanly of you, very emotional of you to need that moment. What is your advice for dealing with that kind of situation?
That's a great question. And I'll be honest, in that situation, I don't know that I handled it very well, because in Respection, so after everything kind of happened and things settled, we had a connection afterwards. And two things happened that I think were really incredible. One is another woman stuck up for me and went to him and said, do you realize that how aggressive you came off, right? And Corey and I were having this conversation at the beginning of this call, or time together before everybody got on, and realizing that this is a really stressful environment. And in grocery, we were moving so rapidly, right, that you could have missed something, right? And we could have missed an opportunity to get something right, whether that was increasing sanitation or, keeping stores open and, all these things that were happening, right? But at the same regard, you have to realize that we're all human. And that was, I think I had hit my peak of, I was exhausted. So I leave the room and come back and we do this thing, but then we don't talk for a day, right? Cooler heads prevail, as my dad often tells me. So we don't talk for the day, and he eventually actually approached me. And what I found very interesting is he thought that it was disrespectful for me to walk away. So I wasn't clear in my departure of, I need a moment, right? Like, I'm here and I'm with you. But to your point, Kelly, you got to be human. You have to be able to say that. And I think to be an effective leader, especially in these very high intensity environments, is you have to be human. You can't, right? Because that was my first thing, is like, I don't want to cry in this meeting. I'm going to look terrible. So then I go and cry in the bathroom, which was appropriate, I think, in hindsight. But again, that thought process around, one, how do you circle back? Like, let's not avoid it, because the male version would probably avoid it. Right? I don't want to talk about it. That happened. We're done. Versus this kind of concept around, okay, how are we going to circle back and be better the next time? And I think we both recognized, there hadn't been this history, and we were working through it together. And I think there was a lot more mutual respect coming out of that. So I think it's own it, be who you are, be thoughtful of how that is going to be interpreted by the other person. And in that situation, man, I learned, right? I needed to say more than just, I'm going to give myself a moment, and I, how do you work through that the next time? Just learn, right?
We have another situational question. What do you do if the aggressor is another female?
Oh, it's a great question. And I think sometimes our worst, right? So I've definitely had this happen. I had this happen most recently, actually, as I talked through the situation and challenge with my transition of my role. So there was a lot of, handing off of things. And, and there was an individual within the organization that was very kind of, I'll call it bullish, okay, you just give it all to me, okay, fine. And of course I had the packet, and I was ready to go, and I was ready to walk them through it. And, here's all of these things, and it was definitely a moment where I had to speak up and stop and say to her, hey, in my mind, we were going to sit down, we were going to go through this. Can you give me an hour? This is how I see it to go through, instead of the kind of the flip of, which is, oh, I'm just going to let it go. Just going to let it go. This is what she wants. Because at that point I knew in my own gut that I wasn't going to feel comfortable letting go of things unless I had translated everything that was in my head and everything that I'd kind of prepped and ready to go and set them up for success. But then at the end of the day, you got to let it go, right? Which is you take it or leave it. And I guarantee you, she's only taken probably a small percentage of what I actually gave her. But I wanted to feel good at the end of the day about giving that over. And so I think it's again, it's that balance, which is I'm going to speak up and I'm going to assert myself. And then I'm going to go, okay, it's ultimately up to you. And I'm not going to let my feelings be hurt, which is so hard to say. And I think over time, you just got to build that stamina.
Thank you. Another question. Can you say more about how to build trust as a woman leader within a male-dominated industry?
God, these are fantastic questions. My gosh. Okay. So I think part of it is the, of course, accumulation of time, and that's really important. But I think the other piece of this kind of goes reverse to some of the things that we've already talked about around the confidence, right? And the faking it until you make it. And I think for me specifically, it's always been my desire and lack of fear to ask for the right question, right? So in a situation where, okay, maybe I'm at the table and, I've got something to contribute, but I'm not really quite sure, maybe I don't say something at the table, but I follow up with somebody later, right? And that's when I got that feedback from a mentor that was like, why didn't you say that in the meeting? That was amazing. And so realizing that how do you build that trust over time is really relationships, right? It's people who have seen you behave in a particular way and respond favorably and go, gosh, I want her at the table. I want her feedback because she contributed that over time. So I think it's, again, the timing issue, it's your relationships, and then it's kind of being bold when you need to be bold to take care of those things. That, I think gains the most respect that, you want to, again, positively contribute to the organization.
I have a question for you, Chelsea. So as someone who is in a company now that has male ownership, and then I know CEO is a man, in Raley's and in other companies that you've worked in before, what do you think, what are they doing, and what do you think companies can do to really help effectively support and empower women in leadership?
That's a great question. One, I think this group, right? I mean, one, that you're all giving your time on a 7 o'clock on a Wednesday, right? To share ideas and concepts and admit failure, right? And admit like, yeah, I did not handle that right, I think is really important. We're very lucky at Raley specifically. Our CEO is a mentor of mine and somebody who, as I think about my transformation of my career, I had been getting to this 5-year mark at Raley's. I was realizing that I wanted more. And he was very, very kind and honest to say, gosh, I don't know where this is going to go, Chelsea. I don't know if I've got this role for you. Essentially where I was, there was nothing between me and my boss. So there wasn't really an opportunity. And I was very upfront and honest and said, I may be looking for something else if, this kind of feels like I've hit my ceiling, which I love. I appreciate it. Thank you so much. All of the above. And he was really incredible. Didn't happen overnight. It definitely happened over kind of a 6 to 9 month period where we identified what the organization needed. He took on a role within the Bay Area Council, identified what his weakness was, which he'd never been a part of an external organization and kind of ran a, call it committee or, an effort, and said, hey, do you want to quit your day job, figuratively, and come and do this for me? And I think it's that, right? It's those leaders that identify what you're really good at and giving you that stretch goal. Because this is definitely a different environment. I'm a single contributor. I'm kind of at the executive level in some regards, but then I'm not at all levels. And so how do you think that through? But I think so in that mindset is, how do you advocate for yourself? How do you tell your male bosses what you do want? And again, it's not, hey, I want this and I want this today. It's, hey, this is what I'm thinking about in my future success. It may work, it may not work, but as you're thinking about opportunities, I want you to think about me. And how do you set yourself up in those environments? We just had a woman at Raley's, which I've been so inspired by. She hit her ceiling. She was in a manager role. They were never going to create a director. And she was in HR, and she took a lateral move to a whole different like benefits and compensation department because she wanted to expand her skill sets. And she realized that she wasn't going to get anywhere through this role. And how do you find organizations that I think support those types of moves and that do listen? So we at Raley's have a pretty incredible space in that all of the leaders will get together and talk about where does everybody at? You may be comfortable in your normal job, so that person stays there, but then who needs stretch goals? And so how do you think about your department or your organization as a whole to uplift those individuals to say, well, I could stretch them and I could move them over here. And some people just aren't built for that. But again, can you advocate for that? Can your leaders advocate for you on your behalf and have a real honest conversation about it?
Okay, thank you. So we have two, I think I see it as a little bit related questions, but one asks what's your advice for addressing repeated small aggressions such as interrupting, undermining work, etc., without it appearing as an overreaction to the specific incident? And then we also have a similar related question where how do you get away from, so if you're a woman in a group of, in a meeting, etc., and being assigned to do administrative tasks like taking notes, etc., how do you get away from that? Because you don't want to miss out on the work that really matters to the organization.
Very good questions. So my first thought in terms of in the moment is, I think it will depend on the right your personality. And I say that because there's one way I think you could think about it of saying, so if someone's snipping at you and to say, okay, Joe, I hear you, right? I totally hear your response. I don't think you're hearing me. Right? And as soon as you put somebody on the spot into that degree, especially in a public meeting, I think they're going to think twice. And it's not rude. I don't think that that's rude. That's just kind of the realities of the situation. Or as I shared, you may need to walk away, right? And not, leave the meeting and not feel like you had that voice heard. And then thinking through what is your role in having a relationship and a follow-up question with that individual. I am not a believer that you should go to their manager or you should go to HR and you should go through that lateral hierarchy and deal with it. I think you have to deal with it head on, right? And how do you say to them, gosh, I know you probably didn't mean to cut me off or not listen, but hey, I left that meeting feeling like I wasn't heard or we didn't relate or whatever that might be. I think it's so important when somebody hears it from you. And it goes back to that empathy, right? Which is all I want you to do is accept that those are my feelings and hope that they can change in the future. If they don't change in the future, then yes, that's your HR route. But the worst feeling is when you get a call from HR and HR says, gosh, we kind of got to talk about this. You had an incident with somebody and da 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 da. Versus, gosh, if I knew that was how they felt, I would have changed my behavior immediately. And so how do you give yourself that grace to have a very difficult conversation with somebody directly? And I think it's really, really important as you think about your success that you don't allow something like that to fester in you or to just let it go. Because again, on the flip side of it, from a male dominant place, they're not going to let it go. They're either going to bulldoze you. I mean, they won't handle it the same way, but they'll bulldoze you about it. Okay, and the follow-up question I'm trying to read here quickly.
So it's about like if you're in a meeting and it's a woman and males and you end up being the person that takes notes or books meetings, sort of administrative tasks, how do you get away from that so that you can move on to more tasks that really matter to the organization? Yeah,
this one's tough, right? We used to say this in the legislature that if you started as a scheduler, you were likely going to end your career as a scheduler because to that question, right? How do you kind of break free of that? And I think for you specifically, as you think through this, I think it's how do you show value that goes beyond those skill sets, right? How do you become a project manager on that account, right? How do you take everything that was accumulated from that meeting and start to show people that you're going to dictate what the tasks are that need to be handled, or you're going to do the follow-up. You're going to say, oh, hey, Joe, you didn't complete this or whatever, or before our next meeting, or send out the task list and assign those things to you, right? Take the initiative. Take the time that you're going to go, gosh, I know I can do this and I can do this well, and I'm going to insert myself because I can do that. And I think sometimes, especially as you're building that early part of your career, you're like, okay, I'm not going to step on toes. When I was at KP, we had a really incredible environment in that normal public relations agencies, you're an account executive, and then you're this, and then you're a director, and there's very hierarchy. And so you couldn't talk to clients if you weren't the leader and so forth. And KP had no titles. So you were either on the lobbying team or you were on the public relations team, and that was the only difference that you had in terms of your role. And so I called myself during that time frame of my career, and I still do it sometimes to a fault, is I was the yes girl. You want me to go to LA and make a presentation? Yes. You want me to go in and you want me to go and deliver letters to the legislature? Yes. You want me to go and write the op-ed for this big political issue? Yes. But you have to be willing to do it all. Right? You have to be willing to gain that experience to some degree. And so if you can flip it in this environment where you're saying, okay, I'm going to kind of lead this meeting, but I'm going to extend those skill sets and I'm going to be the taskmaster. I'm not going to wait for somebody to say, oh, could you write up those meeting notes and send them out and, tell everybody what you want to do? How do you look around the room and say, okay, we've had a great meeting. Let me just recap what everybody's going to do and I'll send a follow-up email. Right? So how do you, I think, push yourself into those predicaments that maybe feel a little uncomfortable? But at the end of the day, it's going to be value. No one's going to say, you really should have sent out that follow-up email, right? They're going to appreciate and go, she's a team player. She's totally jumping in. She's taking this by charge. And you may, again, take a skill set that you didn't have before that you can have now.
Thank you. We have one, now this has to do with salaries and raises and compensation. When and how do you negotiate salaries and raises?
Yep.
Does Raley's have a process for ensuring equality in compensation, or should you not depend on a company to step up to advocate for yourself?
Great question. So I have a leg up in this regard. My dad is a former senior vice president of HR in a semiconductor company. So I had a great coach and mentor most of my career here. So I think the first thing that I often remind people, and I tell this to the people that report to me as well, is in every, quarterly check-in or annual check-in, as much of the conversation that you can pivot and have about what you need to improve on, the better, right? And I often say, like, I don't need you to tell me I'm great, right? And I mean that just as blank, like, we don't need to talk about, oh, that one project you did 6 months ago was really amazing, because you're getting affirmation, especially in today's workforce, I think in a very different way than you did before, right? You're getting affirmation as you go. Thanks so much. So appreciate it. Great to have you on the team, all those types of things. So I often say, like, I want to spend time talking about what can we do to improve? And I'm not going to take it as criticism. I'm totally going to take it as I need work. And I learned this really early on at KP. I was a terrible writer. And it just was not my strong suit. I can communicate like this all day long. I was not a good writer. And you had to be. You were writing op-eds for very high profile people in the political world. And that was feedback I got for years. And it was painful, right? And you get the red line back and you are like, dang it, I thought I got it. But what I realized so quickly is that, one, writing is such a personal thing, right? We all have very different styles. So somebody could think my work was great and somebody could think it was terrible. And, what do you do to kind of work through those things? But it took that bad feedback for me to really change and dig in and take an extra class and do other things and, trial and error and read things 10 times and all those things that, you hate to do about writing, but you're required to do that. And now all I do is write in my job. That's all I do. So that's kind of piece one, is really think about how are you showing up in those situations. And then, but there should be a moment where you get to shout about yourself and say, I accomplished this. And I think the important thing about your reviews is having real tangible data, right? I put on this event, not enough. You know, in a stressful time in COVID, we put on 5 events, we did this, we had X number of people showing there, sales in the store rose by this percentage. You want to start to build that case that this isn't just some small event. This is the Taj Mahal, and this is why this was so successful and what it contributed to the organization, because anybody can plan an event, right? And then the other kind of concept is, so Raley's has a very structured environment. So we have what they call grades. So your role is within a grade. There's a salary range for every grade, and so you should be somewhere in between. And they're very, very transparent around, okay, here's the average compensation increase for the year, and you're here. So if the average, let's say, is 2% and you get 3 or 4%, you're like, oh yeah, great, this is amazing, right? But then how do you find those organizations that will also say, gosh, I see this gap that exists with you and your peers, and they'll take action, and Raley's has done that for me during my time. So find an organization that does that. KP, no threshold. You come in, you work hard, and you hope to be compensated. And I think having that fodder, right? Having those things that says, I did this and I did this and I did this. In the KP world, that was, I brought in this many clients. I billed this much during this time frame. Gosh, we had that client and they were going to roll off, and we did this great project for them, and they stayed on for 6 months, and that equates to this within the business, right? All those types of things. Gosh, here I am. I was young. I was 23, 24. I was traveling like crazy. Well, all the, professionals that had children, they weren't willing to travel. And so I was an asset because I was willing to travel, right? So how do you think about what your skill sets are? And then the last thing, I know this is a very long-winded answer, but I hope all this is helpful, is that balance, right? Which is knowing your worth and being able to say, okay, I'm here and I think I need to be here. So doing that research that looks at kind of the very public data, and you can find out there where your salary should be, right? Based on your contribution and years of service. But then the other thing is saying, I'm going to throw it out there and I may not get it, and that's okay, right? Now, I'm still going to follow up. So I had a young woman that's a good friend and who I mentor, and she's ready. And so we talk about, we build her case, we start talking about her investment and all those types of things. And I said to her, this may not be the right time. So you're going to throw it out there and you're going to say, okay, this is what I'm thinking. And they may say, gosh, we're just not at a place right now where we're doing raises or whatever the context might be. And you say, okay, great. I'm going to follow up with you again in about 3 months. You persist. They're not going to come back and be like, well, I think we talked about that and this is time, right? Hey, you and I talked about this. This was important to me. I told you I'd follow up in 3 months. It's been 3 months. Just want to test the temperature. How are things going? And then, well, gosh, in the last 3 months, these are the 10 things I've accomplished and I've done and I've contributed. And so it's a balance, right? Like, I'm all about fighting, but I'm also very realistic about some of the business constraints that it may not be the right time, and that's okay. But how do you continue to push, whether that's your promotion, whether that's your personal development, right? I want a stretch goal. I want to do this, whether that's, I want to go get trained and I want you to pay for this certification or some type of extra education thing, or just, I want a contribution for the time that I, have given and I want to raise. So yeah, you got to be your own advocate, and you got to kind of push and pull at the right times, and I would say be respectful when appropriate.
Thank you so much. We are just about out of time. Thank you so much for being our first speaker. This was really great. I'm seeing head nods from a lot of people, so we're really thankful for you being here. It looks like Chelsea just posted her contact info in the chat. So if anyone needs it, you can also reach out to Corey, Sumeda, or I, and we can provide you with that information as well. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for being here.
Thank you for the time and the invite. And just you being here shows that you care and that you're bettering yourself and you're creating your own cheer squad of each other. And for that, I think you guys are all rock stars. Please, I say this often and I mean it. Call me, email me, let's get coffee. When everything goes over, you're getting ready to go into a tough conversation and you want a pep talk, please. I genuinely say that I'm available. So thanks again for your guys' time and engagement. And it's so nice to see so many friendly faces.